And with that, we're going to enter the group chat. I have with me Ron Insana, publisher of The Message of the Markets on Substack and an MS Now contributor, Molly Jong-Fast, MS Now political analyst and host of the Fast Politics podcast, Hugo Lowell, senior correspondent for Wired and anchor of the Inner Loop newsletter, and Michael Schnell is with us too, MS Now congressional correspondent. She is there in South Carolina. So, Michael, I'm going to start with you. You've been talking to voters, and I want you to sort of spell out for us what their concerns are. There's a sort of massive pool of candidates there for them, especially for the Republicans, about 10 there. Lindsey Graham's sister, of course, sort of top of mind because she has that Trump endorsement. How are they weighing all this?
Yeah, Antonia, voters are all over the map. We're here right now in Lexington, South Carolina, at a polling place. We've spoken to a supporter of Darlene Graham, supporter of Ralph Norman. We've also heard from a supporter of former South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford. This gives the fact that this has been a truncated election season. It's been a race to primary day. Exactly 1 month ago today, the late Senator Lindsey Graham passed away. Exactly 3 weeks and a day ago from today is when Darlene Graham launched her election bid. And since then, it has been this sprint to Election Day. Now, Darlene Graham is seen as the front runner here because of her name ID, of course, given she is the brother of the late Senator Lindsey Graham and the fact that she has that Trump endorsement. But whether or not the endorsement will be potent enough to push her over the finish line, that's going to be a key question here. In recent weeks, South Carolina Republicans have shown somewhat of an independent streak. Look back to that governor's race just a few weeks ago. Trump had endorsed Pamela Yvette, the lieutenant governor, in the race. She did come in second in first for the first portion, moving on to the runoff. But then in the runoff, she actually lost to Attorney General Alan Wilson. Now, it's notable that the president had at that point endorsed both Yvette and Wilson, but still his initial candidate had fallen short. Now, another interesting dynamic that we're seeing in this race is that while Darlene Graham is running with the president, she's also tacitly running away from her brother. Last week, she said that she would vote to end the legislative filibuster in order to pass the Save America Act, which her brother did not want to do. And then I spoke to her yesterday, and she said that while Lindsey Graham's focus was national security and foreign policy, she'd be more focused on affordability and health care. Now, I could tell you that to some voters, that is a welcome change. I spoke to one undecided voter yesterday who said that he was undecided because he was unsure if Darlene Graham would worry about the interests and the needs of South Carolinians because her brother had trended towards that national security and foreign policy focus. After hearing that she would be focused on things like affordability and health care, he said he was leaning towards her. So certainly very unclear how things are going to shake out today. But as you mentioned, there is an expectation this will head to a runoff. If so, that'll be on August 25th with the top two vote getters going head to head. And whoever wins that will be taking on Democrat Annie Andrews come November.
Molly, I want your take on the dynamic here for Darlene Graham. We've known about her for a long time as the late senator's sister. But the truth is her political resume is very thin. We have these sort of hints of her intentions, as Michael just spelled out there, that she's going to be more interested in affordability and sort of kitchen table issues than she is going to be like an Iran war hawk. At the same time, do you think that family ties, name recognition, are they going to be enough to convince South Carolinians who are Republicans being asked to vote for her that she's actually their person?
Well, that's going to be the big question today. And I also think this is an issue of a Trump endorsement, too. She was endorsed by Trump. She has the incumbency, right? She's been put in the job already. So those are two things that historically would work for her. But remember, we're in a moment of real anti-incumbent fervor. Obviously, she has only been incumbent for a short time, but she could still get hit by that. But then also, Trump's endorsements don't work the way they have historically, and we saw that with Andy Ogles. So I do think it's going to be, and also, there've just been a number of Trump endorsements that have failed recently. So I think there's a real question here about, Trump had a lot more power with Republican primary voters even 6 months ago than he does now.
Hugo, do you see Trump's power waning?
I don't know if it's waning. I think you have to see by the time we get to the general. But I think what you say about Darlene is interesting because, in a way, she's trying to have it both ways, right? She wants to have the Trump support and the base, and that's why she's like I'll gut the filibuster and I'll pass the Save America Act and all these priorities that President Trump wants. And at the same time, she's hedging. And she's like, well, actually, I'm not going to focus on these national security issues. I'm going to focus on affordability, which is clearly going to be a dominant issue going into November. And so she's trying to have it both ways. And in some cases, in some ways, it's a smart strategy.
She's hedging, but also at times reporters have described her as, literally looking away when she's asked certain questions and not being able to articulate her views or her policy stances on key issues. Ron, the affordability is, of course, the story across the board for voters of every background. That's probably why Darlene is being very, that's the one area in which it seems she's being quite clear. To what extent do you think the economy is going to weigh down on Republicans tonight and in the coming weeks and months?
I think this is critical. In addition to the Iran war, the foremost issue among American voters right now is the affordability question, whether you're talking about gasoline prices, which remain elevated because we're still ensconced in this war and there's no agreement over opening the Strait of Hormuz, or whether you're talking about grocery prices, which are elevated, housing prices, which remain elevated, the affordability problem that younger people are having in particular in obtaining their first home. All of this is front and center and still sits atop the list of concerns. And so whether she leans towards it or not, I think might in this case be immaterial. It's really a larger question for the midterms overall, whether or not the Republicans can hold on to the House. Doubtful. Senate's a bit of a coin toss. But I don't see how you get away from that issue as being really the driving motivator behind what's going to happen in 80 some days.
Well, one of the things I was going to ask you, Molly, is, while people are throwing around these labels, socialist, communist, all this stuff, it seems like that's sort of like a political ideological conversation that's sitting on top of what you're really talking about, Iran, which is all the anger people have about the reality that this economy is not functionally working for them. And I wonder, Molly, as you see voters, and we have colleagues going to talk to them every single day, if you get the sense that they are really thinking about themselves in these different ideological buckets, or if they're just trying to choose fighters who are going to do and address the things Ron just spelled out.
Right. And that, I think, is when we have these conversations about whether it's the left versus the center or this versus that. A lot of voters are just like, this candidate speaks to me. This candidate is addressing things I'm interested in, and they're not so ideological. One of the things we're going to see in these primary turnouts that we've seen so far is the sort of where there's bigger turnout on the left or the right. Are Republicans doing numbers? Are Democrats doing numbers? So far, we've seen larger Democratic turnout, and that will speak to whether or not Republicans stay home. And I think that will be the story, because remember, Trump has been very good at turning out voters, but only for himself. Historically, he has not been so good at translating Trumpism to other candidates. And I think he's less motivated than ever to do that, especially when you saw him recently say, voters are mad at Republicans. Not me.
Not me.
But Republicans. So that means...
Yeah, he doesn't seem to really care too much about some of his friends' fate. Michael, I want to ask you on the question of sort of, a potentially depressed Republican turnout. Ohio is going to be a really interesting state to watch because you have Representative Max Miller, this congressman, accused of horrific domestic abuse allegations from his ex-wife, and allegations have to do with their 2-year-old daughter. And, while Republicans, and it seems sort of the deadline has passed, so he cannot get out at this point, he is going to have to be their guy. They're uncomfortable with it. You have the 2 senators in the state out against him. But at the same time, it seems from some of the reporting like the Republicans do not want to go against him too much because they still want to keep this seat. I mean, walk me through, I guess, what you see in the dynamic there out of Ohio.
Yeah, Antonia, it's certainly been an interesting balancing act because before that deadline, which, as you mentioned, did sail by with Max Miller saying he's going to remain in the race, before then, Republicans could be a little bit more forthcoming and outward about saying, hey, I think you should step aside, either whether it was privately or publicly. But as you mentioned, the 2 senators from Ohio did publicly say he should step aside. But now that deadline has passed and Max Miller is the nominee, and we can't forget the fact that the House is very closely divided divided and that it's going to come down to just a few of these purple seats come November, that Republicans have a choice to make. Do they stand by Max Miller, continue funneling him resources and help him get over the finish line to keep that Ohio seat in their column? Or do they maybe not give him as much support and let the chips fall as they may? It's certainly going to be an interesting calculation, an interesting conversation behind the scenes for Republican leadership to have. But it's certainly a quagmire for them, given the fact that they wanted Max Miller to leave. He didn't. So now what do they do, given the fact that they have these competing interests of wanting to be on the right side of history on this one, but also wanting to keep the House in Republican hands?
You know, one of the things, Hugo, that I find so strange about the political conversation right now is that there is a lot of hay made about folks on the left, Democrats' tweets at the moment, and not enough people talking about the fact that out of Wisconsin, Tom Tiffany is an election denier who did not want to certify the 2020 election results, and that then in Ohio, the voters there are now stuck with a person who, these are not just rumors of domestic abuse. There are audio recordings. There are photographs of what his ex-wife alleges happened to her, him tossing boiling water on her allegedly. And I guess I'm confused why more isn't being made of the fact that, like, this is a form of extremism as well.
Yeah, it is pretty extraordinary the extent to which we don't talk about kind of the baggage that comes with some Republicans. And I think it's mainly because at least in part because the Trump operation has been good at insulating their candidates for a variety of different reasons. I mean, take someone like Max Miller, right? There were allegations of domestic abuse from him all the way back in the first Trump administration. It was Stephanie Grisham. Yeah. And that was already baked in. And the Trump operation knew about. And I think part of the reason why there wasn't such a big effort to push him out of the race in the end, and, once Trump caught him up and saw that he wasn't going to go willingly, and they just all kind of stepped back and said, well, we're just going to see how it plays out, is I think there is a hope that that can be repeated, where Max Miller previously had these allegations. He still managed to win his seat. And maybe it will all go away if we all collectively look in the other direction. And I think sometimes Democrats, candidly, do not do a good enough job of highlighting the fact that this guy has credible domestic abuse allegations from two separate women across a long span of time.
And